Alright, now today we're going to look at what some people call the Forgotten War, or the Korean War. And I've got these slides out of order, I apologize, so we're going to look at some things first, okay? Now the first thing we have to understand is that when Japan surrenders in 1945, there was a question of who had authority. And so Japan surrendered in North Korea, and South Korea, in North Korea they surrendered to the Chinese, and in South Korea they surrendered to the British. And so we have two different ideologies going on here. Now immediately as this is going on, a man has established himself as power, and he still has his family there. His name is Kim Il-sung. Later we have Kim Jong-il, and we have Kim Jong-un, who's in there right now, the leaders of North Korea. And they are set up as, make no mistake about it, a communist state. So if you remember about the fear of containment and all that, it's spreading. And so that was our major fear. It's spreading, it's become worse. And so containment has to go into action. We've got to do something to prevent this. So, going back a little ways here. In 1949, there is something called the Geneva Convention. Not the Geneva Accords, but the Geneva Convention. And at the Geneva Convention, they basically decided to keep the 38th parallel as a division between communism and democracy. Well, this would be like putting a pit bull and an angry cat in the same room and saying, don't cross this line. I mean, these two political ideologies hate each other and actually reside very heavily on the fact that the other one is destroyed. And so we have these two warring ideologies, and they say, oh, no one's going to cross the line. What's going to happen? Now this is, 1949, and we're assuming everything is good, everything is fine. And then Mao Zedong happens. Mao Zedong is, of course, the Chinese communist leader. In 1950, China becomes communist. And this is a major fear going forward, because now they're communist, and all of Korea will become communist, and it's spreading. So the United Nations Security Council right here meets, and they decide, well, what are we going to do? What's going on? They basically decide if the North Koreans invade that 38th parallel at all, we will get involved. Now something to keep in mind is the Soviet Union is on this council. So how on earth would the Soviet Union go and vote on something which is communism? Well, little known, little secret, I guess, and it's not going to be a secret much more. The Soviet Union was actually boycotting the United Nations at this time, because the United Nations recognized what they call the two governments of China. And that was, they had a communist seat for Mao Zedong's communist regime, whereas also the exiled nationalist government, very similar democracy with Chiang Kai-shek, meeting in Taiwan, they also have a seat. And so the Soviet Union says, you got to pick one, you can't pick both, and so they're not there, and so they really didn't get a chance to vote. Alright. Now what happens next at the 38th parallel? Well, naturally the North Koreans, with the idea that the Chinese had their back, will invade South Korea. They invade pretty quickly, and so things are asked of the United States. How do we get involved here? Where are we trying to go? Okay. Now we're going to get involved in what's called a police action. Now a police action is basically exactly what it sounds like. You act like the police. You go to protect the other people. So we weren't going to invade South Korea to make South Korea ours. We were going into South Korea to push the North Koreans back on their side of the line and then leave. That was the whole goal. And so there it was that. Now again, I've also talked about boycott, and so we'll skip that. Now the man we put in charge of this whole United Nations operation is Douglas MacArthur, the same Douglas MacArthur who was there when Hoover kicked out the shanty town. He's the same Douglas MacArthur who told the Philippines how we will return. This is the same one, and ultimately, as you'll find out in the questions I have there, him and Truman have a really big, interesting conflict. At the heart of the conflict is that MacArthur realizes that, or he asks, to drop an atomic bomb on North Korea. Now, fearing that this could bring in other countries, President Truman actually advocates what is called limited war. Limited war is you limit the war where it is. We're not going to have it spread. We're not going to go drop an atomic bomb on China just because we're afraid they're going to help the Koreans, because that's going to bring in the Soviet Union and we're going to start a world war. That's his goal. Now, that's what MacArthur and Truman butt heads about is, do we drop the atomic bomb? Do we spread this into a world war? We don't want this. And remember, this is only 5 years out of dropping the other atomic bomb, so that's a pretty scary thing. So limited war means you basically just contain it. You don't want to spread it any further. And so here you have the two sides, right? You have the United Nations down here, and you have the red star of not the Soviet Union, but China at this time. Now, this is the first of two what are called proxy wars. Now, a proxy war would be where a country pays somebody or a fighting force to go and do their bidding for them and therefore come out. Now, this is a idea here. We have an American hand and we have a Russian hand here. And you see that the Russian hand is giving money to, I believe this is al-Bashar of Syria, and this is the American hand given to the Free Syrian Army, and they're the ones fighting over these dead skulls, while you have other people who are engaged behind them, yet no Americans and no Russians will ever lose their lives in this case. It's just the Syrians shooting at each other, whereas we're kind of doing so. Proxy war is getting someone to go and fight your battles for you. This is, you go pick with the guy in the corner that you shouldn't mess with, and then you go jump behind someone big and go, can you go please beat his butt for me, please? And so that's essentially what happens in a proxy war. Someone takes your place to go and do the fighting. And there's been many proxy wars, but the big two in here in the Cold War we're going to talk about, of course, is Korea and Vietnam. And so this is the first. Now I'll just kind of end here and go through the little known thing about Korea is Korea never had a treaty signed. There was a ceasefire signed in 1953. They set the 38th parallel back up. They call it the DMZ now. And any day, just if some Korean wakes up with a, bad taste in his mouth, can go and start this war all over again. And you can imagine what's going to happen. We're going to jump in with the South Koreans. The Chinese will probably come in with the North Koreans, and here we go again. And so this is something that the president has to deal with on a daily basis. What on earth is crazy Kim Jong-il doing up there in North Korea and testing atomic bombs? And it's a mess, and let's be glad we don't have to deal with that, all right? Now, there's other things you're going to get about Korea in the little packet there, and so you're going to do that. You're also going to make me a map, and so you'll see how that works.